Okay, I think we're going to get started. I see people are still coming in, but it's kind of leveled off at this point. Good evening, everybody. I'm Jill LaPlante, the Director of Counseling Services for the Amity Regional School District. And thank you all for being here tonight for our first virtual keynote presentation of the year. I'd like to introduce Tom Brandt, who's here with us as well.
Hello, everyone. Tom Brandt. I'm the Director of Pupil Services for the district, and I appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy evening to join us tonight for our first of several keynote sessions throughout the course of the school year.
So Tom and I will be off screen in a moment once we introduce our speaker for tonight. Just a housekeeping item. Dr. Farrell will be giving a presentation, and we will leave some times for question and answers. So if you'd like to submit a question, Tom and I will be moderating those. You can use the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask your questions, and then we'll do those at the end. The presentation will probably run about an hour and 15 minutes, and then we'll do the Q&A. This session is also being recorded, and we will be putting out the recording at a later date, along with some handouts that Dr. Farrell will be providing. So I think that's it for housekeeping items. So I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. So we are lucky tonight to have Dr. Alicia Farrell, who's an accomplished cognitive psychologist, former university professor, and a national keynote speaker and founder of Clearview Consulting. Dr. Farrell's mission is to help individuals, couples, families, and organizations to find their strength and courage to make healthy decisions and changes in their lives and businesses. She's an expert at translating cutting-edge scientific research into practical everyday life. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Farrell.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks a lot. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to be with me this evening. We are going to jump right in because I have quite a bit of material to cover with you tonight. And I strongly encourage you to go ahead and post those questions along the way so you don't forget them. And we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is really how to raise a well-adjusted, confident, self-reliant, and civil adult in this crazy mixed up world that we're living in. So I've been sitting on my couch working with families and couples and individuals over the last 25 years now. And I've watched life change for all of us in significant ways. You know, one of the things that I've seen change is that as a culture, we have transitioned from thinking that character is important to thinking that we value performance over character. And our kids are getting that message. They're learning that their worthiness is actually dependent on what they do and how well they do it, instead of learning the importance of problem solving and decision making and grit and resilience. And also how to live productively with purpose and values in a civil society. Another huge change you guys are very well aware of that's evolved over the last 25 years is what I call my rectangle. And I got that from my husband's cousin, who calls his a rectangle. And I thought it was brilliant because it kind of takes the power out of this device that we hold in our hands when you think of it as just a rectangle. And, you know, this rectangle has given us access to many wonderful things, and it's also challenged our lives in many significant ways. And our kids are learning to judge themselves and others and the quality of their lives based on what they see and they hear and they read on their rectangles, much of which isn't even real. And then finally, you know, never in the history of mankind have we known more about how to be healthy, you know, how to be healthy in mind and body and spirit. And yet never have we been so stressed and so anxious and so depressed. We're seeing that in our children. We'll talk more about that as the talk goes on. I would suggest to you that as a culture and as families and as organizations, we're kind of all a mess, and me included. And that's pre-COVID. Much of what we're going to talk about tonight is not directly related to COVID. I want to make that that clear with you guys, that much of the issues that we're dealing with today actually preceded COVID. That isn't to say that COVID didn't throw a huge amount of gasoline on the fire, which it absolutely did. It changed the landscape educationally and socio and emotionally for our children. So I don't want you to think I'm minimizing the influence of COVID, but I want you to know that that much of what we're talking about today actually preceded COVID. And that includes, there was a report out last week, I believe it was, a national report about how the national averages in testing have gone down significantly. And we were seeing this trend before COVID hit as well. And now, of course, it's out of control. So anyway, what's important about tonight is that you guys are going to learn a lot about how to parent in this crazy mixed up world. And our children are struggling, and this is going to be a little hard to hear, but much of their struggling has some to do with the way that we're parenting our kids. And we're parenting our kids in reflection of the culture that we're living in. So I'm going to break that down for you in a second. But we're raising children who believe that getting an A in AP Bio or having pages of notable accomplishments starting in elementary school is somehow going to translate into a meaningful and satisfying life. You know, they think it's normal to live in a virtual world where they compare themselves to false realities, and that they believe that they must be perfect in order to be worthy of love and respect. Anxiety has become commonplace and ever present, which is sabotaging the quality of their lives. It's sabotaging the quality of our lives as well. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of the misconceptions that children are growing up with, and that are actually robbing our kids of self-esteem and joy. I know this for a fact because I hear it every day from my young clients, from my parents, from teachers, from other therapists. The kids are not ready for this world, and they know it. And they're panicked, and we're at a loss as parents. And I have to be honest with you, it breaks my heart because your kids are amazing. I sit with them every day, and they are remarkable in so many ways. So, you know, last week I was working with a 15-year-old young man, and I was writing down what he was saying to me in the session, and I wanted to read this to you. I felt like what he was saying was quite representative of how a lot of kids are feeling these days. Some of them can voice the way that they feel, and some of them can't. But I think this is representative. He said to me, "I can't get a break from anything. I feel like I'm always being watched, monitored, judged, measured, and compared. I feel like how I perform is more important than how I feel. I'm constantly reminded that I need to think about my future. Nothing brings me serenity. I feel like it's not okay not to be okay. And when I talk to my parents about not being okay, they get very stressed and scared, and then they won't leave me alone. I don't talk to them anymore about how I feel. And I'll tell you, I feel lonely. All I want is for my parents to know how I feel, to hear me, and to understand. That's all." So that was from a 15-year-old boy, which is pretty remarkable. When my boy was 15, and he's coming on 29 in January. I don't think he could have been quite that articulate. This young man is pretty special. But I wanted to give you a snapshot of how these kids are feeling in their worlds. So my goal is to educate and inspire you to change how you think about your role in your children's lives, and ultimately to ponder the point of life. All right, so I know this sounds really deep and existential. It's meant to be, because as far as I can tell, the only way through the chaos in our lives right now is to ground ourselves in what really matters, and then start making decisions and solving problems and raising our children from that perspective. That is going to be extremely challenging. And it's going to take a lot of courage on your part, because you're going to have to do things that make you very uncomfortable. And you may even be judged for some of the things that I'm going to recommend tonight. Okay. So I do understand that, in addition to the pre-pandemic pressures, these times involve unprecedented uncertainty, and things are in major flux. But I do remain incredibly and eternally hopeful and optimistic that we can all handle the world that we're living in and teach our children to handle the world that they're growing up in a better way. Okay. So I've seen it happen in my practice. I've worked with hundreds of families to make transitions, hundreds of parents and kids. And when people find their courage to change, wonderful things happen. So tonight we're going to talk about parenting. We're going to start by discussing how we parent in the 21st century and why it doesn't work, and kind of how we got there. And then we're going to talk about some practical tips to counterbalance the madness in the culture and to raise these kids that we want to be self-reliant, well-adjusted, and confident adults. So, all right, so how do we parent in the 21st century? We parent in three desperate ways. We parent from a place of desperate love. I know that all of you on the seminar tonight love your children over the moon. I know you do, and that's why you're here, because you're struggling to figure out how to do it better, right? In the best interest of your children. So we parent from a place of desperate love. So what do all of us desperately want and need for our kids above all else? And that is that they're safe, and that they're secure, and that they're happy. So here's the problem. When we're parenting from a place of desperate love, we have a tendency to have very little tolerance for our children's discomfort, their struggle, their disappointment, their unhappiness, their failure. And that is why I call our love for them desperate. We're desperate for them to be happy so that we can be okay. All right. So if they're, we're all trying to think positively in some respects around the influence of COVID on our lives. And one thing that I recognize has been somewhat of a blessing in relation to COVID is that as parents, you all had to let go of an awful lot of control. And it hasn't, the necessity to do that has not resulted necessarily in wonderful things, but that was out of your control completely and out of the educational system's control as well. But what it has done is it's opened up an opportunity for all of you to recognize how strong and resilient your children can actually be. So happiness is not what you have, and it's not what you have accomplished. Happiness originates from how you feel about yourself. And the way that I'm going to suggest you parent tonight is going to help your children feel competent, feel good about themselves. So, second, we parent from a place of fear. We're afraid that our kids won't succeed without our involvement. We're afraid that they can't do it themselves. And we are also afraid to a point where we feel that failure is not an option. So instead of preparing our children for life, we're actually protecting them from life, right? So we actually end up, when we're parenting from a place of fear, we end up protecting our kids from their struggles and from themselves. They don't get to know themselves the way that they need to in order to grow up into self-reliant and independent adults. And we become over-involved and over-directing. And we are all overly familiar with the term helicopter parenting. So, and I understand why it happens for all of you. I absolutely understand it. We need to make a shift, though. It's time for, in the best interest of our kids' socio-emotional health, we need to make a shift. Okay, now the last place we parent from is particularly difficult for you guys to hear. We parent from a place of desperate ego. All right, what I mean by that is that we feel like our kids' success and or their failure is a measure of our success and our self-worth. So we've kind of turned parenting into a competitive sport where we involve ourselves in our children's lives like we're the ones who are trying to be the elementary school child who has the most gold stars, or the best foxtrotter at the middle school dance, or the captain of the football team, the one getting into the Ivy League school and graduating with a job in New York City, making $120,000 their first year. And ultimately what we end up doing when we parent from a place of desperate ego is we make it about us instead of about our children. We kind of hold on tight, involving ourselves in our children's lives instead of letting go. So we become a part of the problem, right? And I want to include myself in all of this too. So my husband and I raised our son. We're baby boomers. I'm on the tail end, so I'm coming up on 60 in November. So I've been on the planet a long time. I've seen a lot of these transitions, and I've been in practice an awful long time as well. And when you can know everything about everything, and when it comes to parenting, when I was parenting with my husband, we were a mess just like everybody else is. We're flawed. We made mistakes. I held on a little too tight sometimes, and I am embarrassed to say, but I'm going to admit it because I'm a real human being and I'm flawed. I definitely did write a paper or two for my son, not completely, but definitely, more than I should have. And that's all okay. So I want you guys to know we're going to be talking in more detail about perfectionism in a moment. And I want you to know that you don't have to be perfect. Your kids don't have to be perfect. In fact, it isn't healthy to pursue perfection. And we need to learn to forgive ourselves for our imperfections and know that our children they're just by nature, they're resilient and they have the grit they need. They just need to learn about it and understand that it's there for them. And our job is to help them do that. So we know that, it hasn't, raising children the way that we are right now, it hasn't been that way. In my generation, which is between kids born between 1946 and 1964, there's about 76 million of us that were born around that time. It was very different for us. Our kids tended to be under-involved rather than over-involved. It didn't mean that it was better. But in retrospect, what it did allow us to do, those of us who survived, is it allowed us to really face an awful lot of adversity at early ages that was not life-threatening, and that actually allowed us to get to know ourselves and understand how strong we actually are. So parenting has always been difficult and complicated, because if you underparent, and that's my parents' generation, you can communicate to your children that your needs and wants are more important than theirs. And if you overparent, you communicate to your children that they're not capable and they can't survive without you. Neither one of these messages are very good. So basically, we're kind of screwed because we've got to find a way to dance in the middle somewhere, and that's a tough place to be. And it's going to be messy. You're human. Get used to forgiving yourself and realize that your children can handle it. I told my son that I was saving, we were saving for him for college if he wanted to go. And I also had a therapy fund for him, so that when and if he needed to go to therapy and work through all the crap I passed on to him, I would pay for it. And if you wanted me to go and sit there and listen to them bitch and moan at the mistakes I made, I'd be more than happy to do that as well. So anyway, we had a nice laugh about that. And okay, having said all of that, you are the most powerful person in your children's life, but you are not the all powerful. And that is, I say that to take some of the pressure off you as well. There are lots of influences that your children experience outside of the home and outside of their relationship with you that influence their development. But you set the foundation for their cognitive, social, and emotional development. So your jobs from the moment of conception is actually to start letting go. By somehow you have to maintain control. So the challenges that we face these days are, I would suggest to you, and many generations say this over and over again, but I really feel strongly that this is an accurate statement, that the challenges that you all are facing today are unprecedented. I'm going to just very quickly give you a rundown on sort of how we got to where we are right now, so you understand that it is not, what I'm talking about tonight with you guys is not to shame you or blame you. You're here for a reason. And the reason that you parent the way you do is because you love your children very, very much. And you're trying to do the right thing. So we're going to take a look at some variables that have actually made parenting exponentially more challenging. No surprises, technology and social media, biggest competitor to parenting. All right, so your children are often more likely to go to their phones to get answers to their questions than to come to you. We know that's the case. And the influences beyond that they're getting on social media and through their technology are often in direct conflict with or competitive with the influences that you're hoping to have on your children. We're also seeing with our kids an age compression. And what I mean by that is younger and younger kids are acting older and older. So we're seeing very young kids who are not yet in puberty acting as if they are in puberty. And much of that has to do with the influences that they're getting online. Okay. So Julie Lythcott-Ames wrote a book, How to Raise an Adult, which I highly recommend. And it lays out the history of 4 major shifts in the world, actually, and specifically in the United States that has led to the culture we're living in and the parenting that we seem to be attached to, the parenting style. So the first was 1981 with the abduction of Adam Walsh. And what that led to was basically a fear of strangers. And we started to parent our kids around this fear of strangers and not letting them out alone for fear that they're going to be basically snatched up. In 1983, there was a publication called A Nation at Risk, and that had to do with the fact that our kids were falling behind educationally, academically, and we needed to do something about that. That led to policies like No Child Left Behind and the Race to the Top. And it resulted in American kids and parents struggling under the weight of more homework. And they started doing whatever they could to survive. I love this anecdote. This is about a physician. This is true. It was a physician with 3 kids. And it was a particularly challenging night at their house. And he decided that he was going to handle it this way. He would do the oldest child's homework. The oldest child would do the middle child's homework, and the middle child would do the youngest homework, and the youngest child went to bed. So that is an expression of sometimes as a parent how desperate we feel trying to get it all done and trying to support our kids through all of their responsibilities. So this achievement culture has led to an emphasis on rote memorization and teaching to the test. And it's also led to our children being expected to do things that perhaps they're not developmentally ready to do at very young ages, particularly the boys. Finally, in 1980, there was an onset of the self-esteem movement. I'm embarrassed to say that came right out of my profession. And basically the message to everybody was that you could teach your children to feel good about themselves. It was faulty beyond faulty, and it led to some very it led to a culture of perfectionism that we'll talk about in a second. And then finally, the creation of the play date in right around 1984. A lot of moms were going back to work. What this did was it basically eliminated free play. So now the kids would get together and the parents would be sitting around watching the kids play, intervening if there was conflict, telling them how to do things, helping them organize things. And basically it became, these kids started to live adult-centered lives where the adults were always, like that young man said, they were always monitoring, observing, judging, fixing. So instead of, we look at our parenting responsibilities as managing our children's lives instead of raising an adult. And this is a philosophical shift that I want you guys to make based on the content tonight. You want to focus on raising an adult, not managing your children's lives. So there are 76 million baby boomers, and due to the sheer size of our generation, we started these trends, believe it or not. We have to take responsibility for some of this. And we became very involved parents. Okay. Let me just, okay. So what we're gonna jump to right now is some additional variables that have made parenting really difficult. And one is the disappearance of average. So I want you guys to all know that most of us are average. And we know that because we have a bell curve that actually represents intelligence. And we know that most people are in the middle. There we have a few on either end, but the great majority of us are in the middle, varying degrees of average. And I'm actually working on a talk called Bring Back Average, because when I was going to school, average was okay. C was okay, B was okay, A was great. But if you got a C or you got a B, it didn't mean that you were a failure. It didn't mean that you weren't worthy. It didn't mean that you were going to be homeless. It just meant that maybe you had a hard week, or maybe it was a tough semester, or maybe it was a subject you weren't interested in, or one that you worked really hard at but was really difficult for you. So there was variability allowed, variability of performance allowed. So it's the disappearance of this concept of average and this need for each one of our children to be exceptional. Okay, so here is the flaw in the logic. First of all, most of us are average. So does that mean that most of us cannot be exceptional? The answer to that is no. You can be average and exceptional. You can find what makes you exceptional and then live that. So the disappearance of average has made it very difficult for parents, because now you take on the mantle of somehow feeling like you have to make sure that your child is special enough and good enough and exceptional enough, and their performance is above average enough that they can compete in this world. And what you end up doing is raising a child that is motivated from a place of fear. And we're going to talk about that a little more in a moment. The other thing is that the best way to say this is that there's a lot of ill-informed parenting going on. So what I mean to say is that as overwhelmed as all of you are, and the fact that you too are spending an awful lot of time on social media, digesting information and clips of information that influence your decision-making in parenting and beyond, much of which is not accurate, downright wrong, influences how you feel, how you solve problems, what you focus on in your parenting. So I just want to bring out one. I never do a talk without mentioning marijuana, believe it or not. And even if you have a child that's in elementary school, I want you to listen really carefully to this, because this is a mistake that a lot of parents are making, and it's having an exponentially negative influence on their children's socio-emotional development and brain development. And that is that ill-informed parenting suggests that marijuana is a harmless drug, and that it's been made legal, so it must be safe for children to use. And there are many parents who are using marijuana with their kids, or allowing their children to use marijuana on a regular basis. Our kids are, teenagers are in stages they're going to experiment. We understand that. I've got a whole talk about all of that. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but here's what I want you to know. Marijuana is not harmless. It's actually very harmful for teenagers to use on a regular basis. And regular basis, I mean smoking 2 to 3 times a week. Many teenagers are smoking every day. We're seeing an exponential increase in kids that are ending up in the emergency room with psychotic episodes due to the marijuana that they're smoking, all related to the fact that the THC levels, whether they're vaping, whether they're regardless of how they're ingesting it, the THC levels are exponentially higher than the marijuana that my generation was using. Upwards, if they're vaping, 90% THC, which is toxic. And I've seen it in my practice many, many times. And I've also seen some permanent changes in brain development and mental health related to regular use of marijuana. So that was something that I wanted to mention, just slip in there for you guys tonight. So, and third, and now we're going to focus on this, is this reinforcement of perfection over failure. And it's backed up by this belief that the opportunities out in the world are scarce, and you have to ensure your child gets the right ones at all cost. And it's not talked about directly, but decisions and action, our decisions and our actions are predicated on this belief system. So you're over-parenting. If you take a close look at where that over-parenting is coming from, it's coming from this place of fear that somehow your child is not going to be good enough to compete out in the world. And unwittingly, you're parenting in a way that is not preparing your children to go out and be able to compete in the world. So we've got to make a shift in that. Okay, so let's talk about perfectionism. Let me just check my time here. Okay. All right, there's a simple definition. I'm going to start with a simple definition of perfectionism, and then we're going to flesh that out. So when I mention to somebody in my practice, I listen carefully and I realize, oh, you're a perfectionist. And they'll say, I had a client do this last week. No, I'm not. I hate that term. I'm not a perfectionist. You should see my room. You should see, my desk. No, I'm a mess. It's like, no. That's not what perfectionism is. Perfectionism is not OCD, although OCD is an expression of perfectionism, and we'll touch on that. Perfectionism is actually a belief system. So the root of perfectionism is believing that your self-worth is based on your achievements, right? Achievements can be anything from your grades, your looks, your athletic prowess, your public awards and recognition, the school you go to, the college you get into, the number of friends you have, the number of likes you get. There are so many ways for our children to measure, compare, and judge themselves. And we are doing that to them as well. So perfectionism is actually a belief system about how the world works. If I am not perfect, I will not be lovable, respected, successful, etc. So it's not rational because we know it's not achievable. So here's what happens when you're a perfectionist. And I will admit to all of you that I come by perfectionism. I don't know if it was genetic, and there's some genetic temperament type based things. Some kids come out with this drive and this intensity to be perfect, and we know that can be genetic. I grew up military as well. My dad was an admiral in the Navy, and we moved a ridiculous number of times throughout my childhood, like 14 times. Actually, when I counted the other day, my dad just turned 90 and we had a birthday party for him. And I said, Dad, you know, I moved 24 times between the time I was born until the time I was 23. So you can, and all over the world. And that really sort of growing up in that world, that military environment, and the expectations, and also probably contributed to my perfectionism. So I know it quite well. So here's what we do as perfectionists. We raise the bar. We raise the bar really high. We hold it really high. And if we actually meet our bar, and sometimes we do, we don't enjoy that, the fact that we've gotten there. Instead, what we do is we assume that it wasn't high enough. And so we raise it up. If we don't meet it, we shame ourselves. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of respect. And we experience a level of self-disgust and self-hatred, right? So you can see how that dynamic could be pretty significant in terms of breaking down your self-esteem, your self-concept. Okay. All right, so we know it's not rational. So here is a little more complicated of a definition, because there are actually 3 types of perfectionism. So one is called, and you can have all 3, by the way. One is a self-oriented perfectionism, and that is an irrational desire to place that irrational desire to be perfect on yourself. Another is called the other-oriented form of perfectionism, and that is this unrealistic standard of perfection that you place on other people. And then there's a third, and the third one is called a socially prescribed form of perfectionism. And this is perceiving excessive expectations of perfection from other people. All right, so it is the belief that other people expect me to be perfect. All right, so we know that any of these forms of perfectionism can be toxic, because those individuals' desire for success are more focused on avoiding failure. So when you're a perfectionist, often your motivation is to avoid failure, because failure is catastrophic for you, because it means that you're no good. So it means that your orientation is negative. It's actually what we call an external locus of control. So people that tend towards perfectionism, and we're going to distinguish these 3 a little further in a second, so you understand a little more about our children and what form they are adopting. Lost my train of thought there. Anyway, so perfectionists are not striving for excellence. Instead, they're motivated to perform in order to avoid failure. All right. So perfectionists, we've been around forever, probably, according to the research, very long time. But there are generational differences in perfectionism. And we've seen these over the past 3 decades. So between 1989 and 2016, young people's desire to be flawless has skyrocketed. And that is no regards for gender, for culture, so for socioeconomic level, all right? And the statistics are somewhat alarming. So the self-oriented form of perfectionism has increased 10%. The other-oriented, wanting other people to be perfect, has gone up 16%. But here is the piece de resistance, the socially prescribed form of perfectionism. That belief that other people expect me to be perfect has increased 33%. That is what your kids are experiencing. That is where their belief system is resting. in this feeling that everybody around them expects them to be perfect. Not that they necessarily have to be or want to be. It's that they feel like it's expected of them. And that's coming from the adult world, not from the child-centered world, but from the adult-centered world. So the young people get the message very early on that they must compete with each other in order to meet societal pressures to succeed. And they feel that perfectionism is necessary in order to feel safe, socially connected, and worthy. All right. So a few things that actually create this belief system of perfectionism. And we're going to look at it from multiple perspectives because we're not entirely sure exactly how all of these play together. But these are things that we're raising our children to believe and to experience that's influencing their belief system that other people expect them to be perfect. There may be, like I mentioned, a biological component. There is evidence that individuals who have a temperament that leans towards perfectionism, genetically based temperament, often are at greater risk for having OCD and also for having eating disorders, believe it or not. All right, so we got to just look at that, look at the biological component as well. But here are some societal variables that are influencing our children's belief system around this. One is having unrealistic expectations that are developmentally inappropriate or downright unachievable. And these are coming from all of us, and we need to just check in with ourselves. And each of us need to assess our children. What are they capable of doing at any given age? And then we stretch them a little bit beyond that. So what I see with the boys in particular is, believe it or not, we've got now, I don't even know what this is, but it's called preschool. So we're starting to put pressure on our kids before they can even walk, that they have to be a certain way in order to be okay. My husband was, on a call with his boss the other day, and his boss had to go because he has twin boys that are, I think they're like 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. And they were at their school, preschool in New York City. And he was getting a call from the administrator at the preschool because they wanted to make an appointment because one of his sons wasn't working hard enough. It's like, okay, he's 3 years old. I don't think that's so great. But that is reality in this day and age. And oftentimes the girls at very early ages can handle those expectations because they're they're developmentally advanced in comparison to many boys. And it takes boys longer. It takes them longer to understand how to relate to each other socially, to sit still, to concentrate. The fine motor coordination isn't the same. And oftentimes what we're seeing with the boys is by the time they get into 4th grade, they really have an inferiority complex and feel like they just simply can't keep up. And often these boys are perfectly fine. It's the expectations that are being placed on them that are not. So unrealistic expectations, excessive praise and recognition for their achievements. And, we still laugh about this around the holiday dinner table, but our son never got an award in one of those end of year award ceremonies. And we never went, actually, because he never got an award. And we laugh about how we're proud of him for that. Some of these award ceremonies are kind of ridiculous. So you got the kid who never missed a day of school for all 4 years of high school. And, this poor Jimmy is dragging his hiney up there to get his award. The kid went to school when he had, the flu and the ear infection and mono and whatever, and he's getting an award for it. So here's the issue with this. Praise around your accomplishments is different from getting recognized for your effort. All right. So when you get praise and you, at young ages, you expect that. You expect to get praise constantly for what you're accomplishing. Then you create what we call this external locus of control, where things that are happening outside of us have to tell us that we're okay, that we're good enough, that we're smart enough, that we're talented enough, that we're going to be successful, et cetera, et cetera. So what you want to try to do, instead of having an internal locus of control, which you would develop when you get acknowledgement around the effort you put into something. So we tried really, really hard to raise our son this way, and it was hard. It was really challenging. But I know I'm just one person, and my son is one person. I'll tell you, he was an average student. He was an athlete. He did, he was not captain of this and did all that. And he never wrote a book, and he didn't save the world. He didn't do any of that. And that was fine with us, because what we were looking for in our son was his character. When he struggled, did he give up? Or did he figure it out with our support? Did he reach out for help? Did he care enough? Not all the time, because he was an adolescent boy, but sometimes, okay, yeah. Was he polite? Was he respectful? Was he thoughtful? Did he care about his friends? Like, all of these things that we forget are so much more important than our children's performance. And that is not to say that you don't have expectations around your children doing well. Okay, I don't mean to say that. This is not a, oh yeah, kumbaya, just make sure your kids are good people and they'll be fine. That's not what I'm saying, because the world is competitive. So but we have to counterbalance this culture of perfectionism with the realities of life and the importance of the development of character, because that is what's going to carry them through life. Because when you have an internal locus of control, you're going to motivate from a place of desire, from a place of self-respect, from an energy where you believe that you're worthy of doing well. You don't need someone else to tell you that all the time in order to stay engaged and stay motivated and persevere through difficulty. You have that belief system inside of you that says, I can handle this. It may not be pretty. I may fail. I may make some really big mistakes, but I can handle it. I'm going to get to the other side, because most of us do. The alternative is to get off the planet. And look at, so one of the things that we see happening as a function of this culture of perfectionism is we see our kids' anxiety off the charts, stress off the charts, suicidal ideation, successful suicide off the charts, raising 40% more for boys over the suicide over the last 15 years. For girls, 30%. Our children are telling us that we're doing something wrong. It's not that there's something wrong with them. They're telling us through all this desperate behavior and mental health issues and the pushing back, the fighting back, the giving up, the trying to do too much, making themselves sick, the self-harm, the drug and alcohol use. It's all gone up exponentially in the last 15, 20 years. And I suggest to you, the root of all of that is that our kids think that they have to be perfect because we are communicating to them that they need to be in order to live in this world. Okay. Being measured and compared is another thing that's contributing. So creating a competitive developmental environment where they learn this belief system that if you're not the best, you're not good enough. And like we said, that there's not a lot of room for the best, right? There's only a few people that get to take that slot. And I would suggest to you that being a little less than best can actually be a great place to live, great place to be. Okay, let me check my time here. Got a few more minutes. I just want to mention a few more things, and then I'm going to go over some of the belief systems that you can reinforce with your kids to counterbalance this idea of perfectionism. So I mentioned raising kids in an adult world where they're constantly monitored and measured and compared and told what to do. We are not raising children that are accustomed to thinking for themselves, and we are not thinking for ourselves either. In order to make these changes in the way that we're parenting, we really do need to take a step back and think for ourselves, get off of social media, decide what's important to you, decide what your family values are, and then make decisions around that. When we were raising our son, we got some pushback sometimes because the feeling was that we weren't pushing hard enough. We weren't, monitoring him enough. We were not laissez-faire parents. We were not permissive parents. We had hard stops, but there was only a handful. And our son knew what they were, and he knew what the consequences of crossing over those hard stops were. And he did. He crossed over some of them at times, and there were consequences to that. But in general, we mentored him. We had a very authoritative style of parenting, which is where you create a structure in your parenting environment that's fair, but it's clear what the expectations are, what the boundaries are. And then you use a very collaborative style of communication with your child where they get to participate, not all the time and not completely, in the decision making and the problem solving. So you want to think of yourself in a sense as kind of as a coach, even with young kids, even with starting quite young. You can start imagining yourself as a coach. So we had a forum here in Old Saybrook like 5 years ago, and we got about 12 teenagers together. We put them on the stage at Old Saybrook High, filled the auditorium with over 200 parents and grandparents. It was really wonderful. And we asked them questions. And there was a grandfather who asked all of them, "What do you think your parents' job is?" And this young lady piped up and she schooled us all. She said, "You know what? Your job is not to tell us what to do, how to do it, when to do it. Your job is to get to know us. From the very beginning, get to know us, help us get to know ourselves, and then support us and guide us and pick us back up and brush us off and send us back out in the world to try again." And we were pretty speechless, like, okay, she nailed it. That isn't an easy job, and it's become far more difficult in the culture that we're raising our kids in, but it's possible. And I don't point to myself as some kind of perfect parent, because it definitely was not. But we tried really hard to parent like this. And I will tell you that it worked. My son went off and became independent, and he makes decisions for himself. He's not perfect, which I love. And he's not afraid of adversity, and he challenges himself, and he has values. He's got character, and that's what's taking him through life. So it was worth the difficulty and the fear around taking a step back, lowering expectations. So that sounds scary. And I know you guys are all like, "Screw you, Alicia, lower expectations. That's not a good thing. That's not what you do with your kids," because then you communicate to them that mediocrity is okay. And what I want you to know is that all the research indicates that when you lower expectations, your performance goes up, not down. So if these kids, think about it, if these kids have this perfectionistic belief system, their bar is too high a lot of the time. And some kids are just going to give up and say, screw it, I can't do it. And I'm not going to try at all. Other kids are going to keep trying, and feel inadequate about their performance. But if you take that bar and you say, well, what would happen if instead of studying for an A on your French exam, you study for a B? What would that look like to you? Why don't you try it and see what happens? Let your kids experiment. Why don't you try studying for a C? Let's see. And here's what often happens. The kids end up wanting to do better themselves because they've lowered their bar, and now it feels possible. It feels manageable. It's like if you said to yourself, if we were in person and I asked one of you to come up and do some push-ups for me, and I said, I want you to set the bar really high. And so you set the bar at 150 push-ups. That's a lot of push-ups. Yeah, maybe if you're a Navy SEAL, you can do 150 push-ups. Most people can't do it, but you set the bar because you feel like, you know what? I need to challenge myself. Chances are when you realize while you're doing those push-ups that you're not going to get to 150, you're going to slow down, and at some point you're going to give up. Now, if I said, no, I don't want you to do that. I want you to set the bar somewhere reasonable, somewhere where you think you could actually meet it. You could absolutely hands down, no problem. And you say, you know what, I could probably do 10. Okay, that sounds good, do 10. While you're doing 10, if you get to 10 and you feel like you can do more, go ahead. And what you'll find is you may actually end up doing 20 or more. Who knows? But it's a mind thing. So don't be afraid to let your kids lower their bars a little bit and watch them thrive under less expectation. Watch them feel better about themselves when they perform because they're in charge. Okay. All right. Let me check my time here. Ooh, I just lost my, hold on just one sec. Just lost my, okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a really quick story, and then I'm going to read something to you, and then in the last few minutes, I'm going to go over the things that you can do to counterbalance perfectionism. And the story is actually it's actually about my husband in high school. And I'm going to preface it by saying that you want to raise a child who's not afraid to ask for a ride to the highway. All right. Now I'm going to tell you the story around this ride to the highway. So my husband grew up here in Old Saybrook. We're on the shoreline. He's a senior in high school. He goes to the guidance counselor and he says, okay, so I want to, make a plan. What's next, in my life? And the guidance counselor says to him, well, Glenn, here's the deal. You're probably not going to amount to much. So you should, and this is a true story, you should go get a job at the tool and die factory in town. You'll get benefits. You can stay there, the rest of your life. Probably a good idea for you. Now, I'll jump in here and say that I was talking live to an audience last year, and there was a woman in the audience who graduated with my husband, and she had the same guidance counselor, and that guidance counselor told her the same thing. So anyway, I thought that was funny. The guidance counselor is no longer around, thank God. Okay, so my husband took the guidance counselor's advice. And he went and got a job at the tool and die factory. And the first day he walked in, he's a tall, handsome guy. He was an athlete. It was the 70s. He looked a little rough, but he walked in and there was a 55-year-old guy who was working next to him on one of the lathes they were working on. And this guy said to my husband, you need to get out of here. He said, I've been here my whole life. This is not a place for a young man like you. You need to do something else. Go to school, don't go to school, whatever you're going to do, but this is not where you should be. And my husband's like, oh, well, okay, whatever. Well, 2 weeks later, this 55-year-old man had a heart attack and died right next to Glenn on the job that day. And my husband had a wake-up call, and he said to himself, I need to do something here. And he did not come from money. And he decided he was going to go to college. He picked a place on the map that was as far from Old Saybrook as he could get. It turned out it was Washington State, Olympia, Washington. There's a university there. And he got in. He applied and he got in. And he was at work at the tool and die factory. He called his mom and he said, I got into college. He was very excited. And she said to him, we can't pay for it. We can't even get you there. So I don't know what you're thinking. She just rained on his parade and he was really upset. He hung up on her. He waited a few minutes, put a few more quarters in the phone, called her back. And he said, here's the thing. All I need is a ride to the highway. If you give me a ride to the highway, you and Dad, I'll take care of the rest. Well, that's what they did. This was 1975, I think, 75. He packed a duffel bag when it was time for him to go. And they dropped him on 95 right outside of Old Saybrook. And he hitchhiked all the way across the southern part of the country, up the coast of California into Washington State. And he arrived 2 weeks after the semester started. And that began his 7-year journey to get his undergraduate degree. So I tell the kids when I talk to graduating seniors and juniors, I tell the kids this story and I ask them, how do you think he was feeling at that moment? And they give me that blank stare. And I said, do you think he was really feeling confident? Feeling like I got this, you know? No, he was scared to death. He had no idea what was going to happen on this journey. And he had a lot of things happen, some of which were relatively harrowing. But the point of the story is that he had the grit to ask for a ride to the highway. And obviously, literally, we don't want our kids asking for a ride to the highway because it's illegal to hitchhike these days and it's not safe. But the concept of that, think about the concept of that and how it relates to your kids. Even if you have little kids, you've got to start thinking about wanting to have this little young human being when they reach 18, that they have a little piece of that belief within themselves that the world is manageable. You just have to go out there and figure out how to manage it for yourself. And that courage and that just the beginning of that feeling like I can handle enough to go out there and figure out how to handle the rest. And that's being able to ask for a ride to the highway. So this is the process by which we learn. And it's actually an autobiography by Portia Nelson. It's called There's a Hole in My Sidewalk. And I'm going to read it to you. It's very quick. It only takes under a minute to read. So there are 5 chapters. First chapter, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost and I'm helpless, and it's not my fault. And it takes forever for me to find my way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend like I don't see it, and I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes me a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am, and I know that it's my fault, and I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. This is the process of life. This is the process of learning about yourself. This is the process of learning how strong you are, of learning to take responsibility for yourself. We cannot continue to rob our children of these experiences. Because every time we do, we miss an opportunity for them to get stronger. And we want our children to make mistakes, to fail, to figure things out, to get out of that hole, to blame us, to learn not to blame us, to blame their teachers, to learn not to blame their teachers. We want them to do that while they're with us in ways that are not devastating and life-threatening to them. So they don't have to go through that process when they get out, when they're out on their own. And that's what I see in my practice. A lot of these young adults, they're brilliant. They're amazing in a lot of ways, but they don't believe in themselves. They don't believe that they can handle it. And it is a huge disservice that we've done them. Okay. All right. So a few things, and I've got a plethora of handouts that I'm going to give to Jill to pass along to you guys. And one of those is these 14 core messages that counterbalance this climate of perfectionism that we're raising our kids in. And I want to challenge you guys to deliver these messages to your children through your expectations of them, through your support, through your dialogue with them, and also model them for your children through your choices and your behavior. Okay, so we'll go over these real quick and then you'll get the handout so you can take a better look at them. So these are beliefs that counterbalance this sense of needing to be perfect because you think everybody else wants you to be. Suffering is a normal part of life. Find ways to teach your kids that it's normal. It's normal to feel stress. It's normal to experience anxiety. If you avoid it, if you deny it, if you get stuck in it, you are not going to grow. If you embrace it as normal, you can balance it out with moments of joy. And that's what we all try to do in our lives, right? Balance out the loss and the adversity, the grief, all of this very difficult stuff that we deal with as human beings with moments of joy. Okay, here's another one. Connection with others is the most powerful antidote to human suffering. Being on social media is not connection. Teach your children the importance of, so we're here on technology. It seems so antithetical to be saying this, but I don't use technology when I speak in person. I don't do PowerPoint presentations. I don't do PowerPoint presentations on Zoom. I'm sitting here imagining all of you and looking at you without anything in between us. Real connection. Teach your children what that is, how to do it, and the importance of it. So being on social media is not true, meaningful, lasting connection. Okay, 3. Most people are faking confidence. We need to teach our kids this because real confidence is not knowing how to do something, but simply having the courage to believe that you can do it, that you can handle it, and that you're capable of influencing change in your life. All right, so it's available to all of us right now. And I tell the kids that when I talk to them. I'm like, you can be confident right now. You don't have to wait to know how to do something. You don't have to be the best at something to be confident in it. All you have to do is believe that you can figure it out. That's confidence. So teaching our children that, teaching them that, we fake it all the time. You know how often you fake it, right? In some ways, I'm faking it right now. I'm just like you guys. I just have a little more knowledge, a little more life experience. Maybe I'm a little older. I'm done raising my kids, but we all do it. All right. Confidence comes from in here. It's a belief. Okay. 4, you always have a choice. So sometimes we pick our challenges and sometimes they pick us, but it doesn't matter because we always have a choice. And even when you think you're not making choices, you are making choices. So if your child is making a choice not to study for their chemistry exam, instead of forcing them to study for their chemistry exam, talk to them about why they're making that choice and what it might mean and what an alternative choice might be, or what might an in-between choice be, and then let them make their own choice. And then when the consequences are meted out, and let's say they're not so great, help them understand that and work through it so that they can maybe make an alternative choice the next time. Okay. So you always have a choice. This is something that my dad, not a lot of things that my dad told me, I repeat back because, you know, there was some hard knock stuff going on there, but he taught me quite a bit. And this is something that he said that resonated with me, that I have lived my life on and raised my son, and that is to run your own race. Don't settle for what other people think of you, right? Don't settle for what other people think of you. Work hard to know your own strengths and weaknesses, your values, your goals, and then apply everything you have to what you want. So take responsibility for yourself. I call it driving your own bus. Get in the driver's seat and take responsibility. There's a lot of groupthink going on out there, and the kids get sucked into it on social media, and it's not good. It's not good for all of us. We need to start taking a step back and thinking for ourselves. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time. I'm just going to mention a few more, and then we're going to stop. All right. So define a successful life for yourself. Bring your expectations back to the real world. We talked about that. Use your fear as a tailwind to push you ahead instead of a headwind to hold you back. And I have some more information about that on the handout. And then the last thing is, fixed ability does not exist. So here's what this means. Everyone can strive to get better at something, and not everybody has to be good. So my son, terrible at languages. He took French of all choices, very difficult language. The grammar's complicated. He hated it. He just absolutely hated it. And he was never going to be very good at it, but he could always get a little better. So that's how we worked on it together. I said, you don't have to be good at French. I don't care if you get an A in French. I just want to see that you're working on getting better, because fixed ability doesn't exist. You can always get a little bit better. I'm a terrible musician, awful. And I'm not a musician at all. But I bought a ukulele several years ago because my therapist told me I needed to do something that I'd never be good at. And I needed that challenge where it didn't matter how hard I worked. I had to let go of my perfectionism and just accept that good enough was good enough. And I'm terrible. I'm just awful. And I could apply myself to the moon and back, and I still wouldn't know how to play the ukulele. That's okay. I can sit down and get a little bit better. And what that does, that idea that fixed ability doesn't exist and that you don't have to be the best, you just have to know how to get better, it takes a lot of the pressure off, and it lowers the expectation, which, as I mentioned earlier, raises your performance. So I'm going to stop right there, and Jill and Tom can come back on, and we can, if you guys have any questions or any comments or anything that you'd like to share.
Great, thank you very much. I think we do have a couple questions in the Q&A, so just a reminder, if you have questions or comments, you can put them in there and we'll go through them. Can you explain the difference between anxiety, stress, and nerves?
Yes, so this is a very important distinction. We are basically animals, and stress and anxiety are built into our systems. They're actually there for a reason. They're there to help us perform. So let me think about this. Think about stress and anxiety on a spectrum. And on this end is stress. And stress is when your brain gets flooded with stress hormones, And those stress hormones, you get just enough that it helps you focus. It gives you energy, it helps you focus, you're processing more quickly. As you move from stress to chronic stress, so chronic stress is a little bit different. Chronic stress is when you have heightened levels of stress and you've got this flow of stress hormones that are happening not just in the moment, but they're constant. It's constant flow. So most of us experienced chronic stress over the course of COVID. And chronic stress can actually start to wear us down. And the reason is that those stress hormones can become toxic when we hold on to them. And by the way, a really great way of getting rid of those stress hormones is to exercise. That's like the holy grail. Go for a fast walk and you will feel better right away. If I have a really stressful day and I don't sleep well, I get up, I might even feel a little sick to my stomach, I might have a headache. But if I go take my dog for a walk at 5 in.the morning before I start my day, all of a sudden I'm feeling better. So just so you know, that's a really great way to get rid of those stress hormones. So you have stress, you have chronic stress. Now, stress and chronic stress are rational. And what I mean by rational is that they are in direct relationship to the experience that you're having. So look at COVID and that level of uncertainty that we had to deal with. That was our chronic stress made sense. It wasn't like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. What are you so stressed about? Why aren't you just out walking around with your mask on and who cares? Well, no, that's silly. That would be denial and avoidance. And in that situation, it wouldn't have been healthy. So stress, chronic stress is rational. It's in direct proportion to the situation. If you have a child who has an AP chemistry exam coming up and they're experiencing stress around that, or let's say they go to school and their test is later in the day and throughout the day they're feeling agitated, they're having a little difficult time concentrating and maybe they're feeling a little agitated, normal. That is rational. That's not anxiety. Okay, that's not anxiety. So I know a lot of kids are coming down to see the nurse and to see the counselors because they think they're having anxiety, because a lot of times we're calling stress anxiety when it isn't. Kids are being diagnosed with anxiety disorders when they're not having anxiety, they're having stress. Okay, and they're learning that stress is not okay, it's not normal. So they feel like something's wrong with them when they're feeling that way. Well, how often in your lives do you feel like that? Quite often, because it happens. We're human. And we have this hindbrain and this midbrain, right? That gets us going. Okay, so then what does anxiety actually mean? Anxiety is irrational. Okay, so what that means is it's an overreaction to a situation. And anxiety is also normal. It's also very normal to have an irrational reaction. When you have an anxiety disorder, your anxiety affects the quality of your life. And it affects the quality of your life over a period of time. So in order for someone to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, they need to have been experiencing anxiety to the degree that they are not functioning well. You know, they're isolating, they're avoiding social situations because they go and they have so much anxiety that they can't stay. Okay, so think about that. You're going to a social event and you go and you have so much anxiety that you can't breathe. You're not having a panic attack, but you're feeling like, I can't breathe, I have to go. That's irrational. You're at a social event, right? Rationally, there's nothing there there's no tiger chasing you. There's nothing that's threatening your life, but it feels, your nervous system is reacting as if that's the case. And when your nervous system reacts that way and keeps reacting that way, and it becomes chronic over time, it can become a disorder. So here's the thing. If you take your kids to somebody to be evaluated, and they meet with your child 1 or 2 times and they say, Junior's got an anxiety disorder, they need medication. You want to go see somebody else. Because here's the thing, there's so much that can be done around anxiety. These kids can be taught. And I know do you guys have a DBT program?
Yeah, we have both DBT and CBT.
Beautiful. So your school system is advanced. I don't know of any other school system that has these programs. So dialectic behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, they're working with your kids on these. These 2 forms of therapy are incredibly helpful when it comes to managing anxiety and learning how to recognize it, learning how to preempt it, learning how to deal with it if it gets beyond you. So, and if you're taking your child to a therapist, you want them to know how to teach that child DBT and CBT skills, because those have been shown to be incredibly helpful. So, and here's the thing with, here's what happens. Your kid starts to feel stressed. You start to feel uncomfortable. You step in and take the stress away from them. And now they don't get to learn that they can feel okay after not feeling okay, and that not feeling okay is normal. So then the next time they're faced with it, their stress goes up because they don't feel like they can handle it. And then all of a sudden they can't be with you all the time. And now their anxiety starts to peak. And this is what we're seeing with the kids. Then they start to feel irrationally anxious about things that doesn't match, doesn't make rational sense. And what do you do in that case? You step in because now you're afraid for them. Now they can't function. So now you do even more for them. So if you want to try to avoid your children having to struggle with anxiety at heightened levels in their lives, don't take the stress out of their lives. Support them, mentor them, help them, show them how strong they are with your belief in their ability to manage. If your child already has what has been shown to be real anxiety, which is chronic irrational reactions to situations, they're going to a sleepover, they can't handle it, they can't get out of the car, they don't want to go to school, they go to school, they spend the day down the nurse's office. The only way for them to learn how to manage it, how to get beyond it, is to push through it. At that point, every time you take it away from them, they miss the opportunity to get stronger around it. So, and that's the case for anybody who has anxiety. The only way to heal and to manage, to learn to regulate around it, is to move through it. You can't move around it. You don't learn what you need to learn when you move around it. And so if you're intervening too much with your kids, if you're taking over and doing too much for them, if you're reinforcing their anxiety through your own anxiety, so there's something called intergenerational transfer, and that is when you yourself struggle with anxiety, and now you're passing it on to your kid because of the way that you react to things. Like, for example, your kid's going to a sleepover and you're anxious about it. It's their first one. And so you say, so Susie, here's the thing. I know the sleepover's in a week, but we're going to pack your bag on Wednesday. So you're going to be all ready. And I'm going to take you and I'm going to walk in with you. Don't think I'm going to let you just get out of the car and go in there on your own. And I'll go in and I'll wait until you let me know that everything's okay. And then that's when I'll leave. But hey, if you, if you're uncomfortable, you just call me, I'll come get you. And by now the kid's like, what the hell am I even going to this thing? This sounds dangerous. This sounds like I shouldn't be going to this. I mean, you're the adult telling me that all these things have to happen and I may not be okay and you're going to save me and all this stuff. And prior to that, the kid was thinking, oh, I get to go over to Mary's house for a sleepover. So be careful about, if you are struggling with anxiety or chronic stress, get treatment for yourself. don't pass it on to your kid. And sometimes you're passing it on to your kid and your kid doesn't even have it. And they're thinking, holy cow, I don't even know how to manage this. You know, you're making it sound like I'm feeling like this, and actually I'm not. So long answer to a complicated question, but just remember, yes, anxiety is like, it's like cotton candy. You know, when you go to the fair and you get, you know, they're rolling that little funnel, and the candy's all, you know, the cotton candy gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time they hand it to you, you're like, oh my God, this is huge. I'm never going to be able to eat this. That's how anxiety feels. When you experience anxiety, it feels big. And here's what happens when you take a bite, that first bite of that cotton candy, you're like, what? Huh? Did I even take a bite? It just dissolved in my mouth. So the point being that anxiety doesn't have rational substance. So when you challenge it, when you take a bite into it, it's like, oh, it's gone. It disappears over time. Now, I'm not saying that if you have an anxiety disorder, it can disappear and you never have to worry about it again. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that anxiety makes everything feel so much bigger than it actually is. And then once you address it, you realize that it's not that big a deal and that you're strong enough to get through it.
Great. We have about time for one more question, Dr. Farrell. And one of the questions that kind of came through in a couple different ways was fostering independence. So really, if you could provide the group maybe one or two takeaways for each kind of developmental area. So elementary school, middle school, and then, you know, for our parents getting ready to send their children off to college in a short, 6-7 months here, maybe, a tip or two at each kind of developmental time frame for helping to foster that independence.
Yeah, great question. All right, so I can give you a general answer, that philosophy that you can apply. Here's what you want to do with your kids, regardless of age. If developmentally they're not ready to do something, you do it for them, right? So let's take a kid who's not ready to learn to tie their shoes yet. And so you tie their shoes for them, of course, you're going to do that. Just when you start to see that the child is starting to have an interest and their fine motor coordination is getting to the point where they might be able to try, you start to show them how to do it. All right. So you're like, oh, you sing your song, you show them how to do it. And then when they show an interest, or you feel like they're ready to do it on their own, you let them do it. And they're going to make mistakes, and you help them, and you mentor them, you correct them, whatever. When they master the task, they do it themselves. Now, does that mean you can never tie their shoes again? No, that's not what I'm saying. But for the great majority of the time, you expect that they're going to tie their shoes for themselves. The same thing applies to any child at any age. Know what your child is capable of, and then expects them to do those things. We underestimate what our children are capable of. We do. Now, that sounds counter to what I said earlier about expecting them to do things that are developmentally beyond. I'm talking about that in relation to more of an academic environment. Okay. So you have a 3-year-old. If you switch to plastic plates, that 3-year-old can help you take some stuff out of the lower drawer of the dishwasher. Let them do it. And let them drop something. Let them figure it out. And when they drop it, you don't shame them. You don't yell at them. You just say, oh, sometimes you drop things. That's okay, honey, pick it up. Great. Thank you. Thank you for your help. I appreciate it. It was really helpful. So pay attention to what your children are capable of doing, and then expect them to do it and support them. Prior to that, you're going to do it for them. Then you're going to teach them how to do it. You're going to watch them do it themselves. And then they're going to be able to master the task, whatever that is. I will send, for the parents that are on this call that have kids going to college, I have some great handouts with some scenarios of things that you might face when your kid goes to college. Like they call you and they say, I've got 2 hours to drop my history class and I'm failing and I don't know what to do. How do you respond to that, right? Because you want to garner independence at that point. So I've got some really, really straightforward scenarios and ways of responding to that, how to nurture that young adult into independence after they leave the house. So I will give you one last example if I could, if that's okay. And that has to do with grades, okay? So you can start this process in middle school with your children. And you can start the dialogue earlier than middle school, but the letting go you can start in middle school. And this is how it works. And this is how you're going to engender independence and an internal locus of control and motivation for academic success. What you do is you sit down with your child, you say to your kid, you know, you're old enough now to establish expectations for yourself. And I'm going to help you do that. I'm going to mentor you around that. And I'm always here to support you. Just know that. But we're gonna start the process now. You're getting older, you know, and when you get into high school, it's going to really be on you. So here's how it's going to work. We're going to sit down before every quarter, and we'll make a list of your classes, and you can decide for yourself what you want to get in that class, what grade you want to get. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you might achieve those goals. Just real quick, honey, it's not going to take long. And then every couple of weeks, we'll sit down and we'll take a look at it together and see where you're at. And we're going to look at it together, which means that I'm not going to tell you or punish you or do anything like that. We're going to check in with you. And if you say you want to get a B and you're getting a C, we'll just take a look at what's going on there and see what you might be able to do to get yourself to a B. Or maybe you want to change your expectation. That's okay too. And let your kids drive that bus. Now, they may blow it. I did this with my son, and the first quarter, you know, it wasn't terrible grades, but they weren't nearly as good as they might have had I been on top of them. But then he started figuring it out. And over time, he started to sort out the fact that when he put the effort in, his performance went up. And it wasn't about me telling him that he had to do it. It was about what he wanted for himself. And so that is a great model for engendering independence and independent thinking on the part of your children. Your role is not to be the authoritarian, not to be the one to shame and punish your children when they don't perform to your expectations, because that's going to shut them down. That's going to make them hide out. That's going to make them become perfectionists and kill themselves trying to get straight A's. No, you want them to be in charge and let them figure out the difference between applying themselves in a way that feels good to them versus applying themselves in a way that doesn't end up feeling good to them. You don't have to pile on. So last thing I'll say is that quarter that my son didn't do well, he was scared. He's like, oh my God, I'm going to come home with this report card and mom and dad are not going to be happy with me. And he came home and we said to him, look, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. And you're going to figure it out for yourself. This is the process of growing up. So if something is important to you, you're going to put more effort into it. And we're here to help. So just try again. Let's try again. Because think about the hole in the sidewalk. You want your kids to fall in and feel like they're not responsible. You want them to get out. You want them to fall in and realize they are. And then you want them to take a different road. But you want them to make that decision. You don't want to make that decision for them. Okay? Yeah, so.
Great. This was really helpful. We appreciate your time and your presentation. And like I mentioned before, we will put a copy of the presentation and all of the handouts out to the community. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight with you. Godspeed with everything going on in the world, and take care of yourselves too.
Thank you.